Good morning, good morning. Welcome back to another video. Happy 5th of July to everybody, except for people who were bashing America on my timeline yesterday. And welcome back to another video. So today I wanted to talk about critical race theory, and basically, like it says right there at the bottom, neither side is really being honest. So what I see a lot of times in the political sphere is that everybody wants their side to be right. Okay, and oftentimes what you see is there's some truth on both sides. So I want to go into some of what I see as that truth on both sides, and some books that I've read in the past that would be classified as what I consider to be critical race theory, and just exploring the racist past of America, but also not going too far with it, because sometimes people go way too far with it and they think that everything in their life is due to racism, right? They think that they cannot rise above their current circumstances, and they don't take the time to look in the mirror and see is it me? Based on my video yesterday, all you guys who caught that one, you see how far I've come in a year, and it had nothing to do with the color of my skin. Okay, so we're going to talk about it today. I got about 29 slides for you guys here, so let's get going. So the arguments aren't saying the same thing. That's what we're going into here. So one side is basically saying this: we should teach about the history of how race relations have shaped society. So I would say that I agree with that. Okay, you can't deny that race relations have shaped society. If you understand history in any way, you cannot disconnect the past from the present. It's one continuous stream of events. Okay, so I would say I agree with that. And the other side would say something along the lines of, we shouldn't teach people that they are inferior or doomed today because of their race, or that America is a racist country. And I would say that I agree with that as well, because for a racist country, there sure are a lot of brown people, black people, people of other races that want to come to America and have a better life. So for a racist country, there's a lot of evidence that would stack up against that notion. So anyways, I think that kind of puts me towards the middle, where nobody's going to be happy with this video. So book recommendations down here. Some of these are in my description. The Color of Law, that goes over a lot of how the law shaped basically black wealth accumulation over, like, before the civil rights era. How to Be Black, that's just talking about the black experience. It's more of kind of a funny book that's basically about how black people are perceived in America, and how this one person who went to Harvard, how his life was. Obviously, the title there is a little bit satirical. There is no one way to be black, and that's kind of what the whole book is about. The Lies My Teacher Told Me, that one basically looks at history, takes another critical look at it, and basically goes through some of the omissions that we see in our history books. And it goes through actually the process of how history books are selected. So history books are basically selected by these boards, and sometimes these boards want to block certain information purposefully. And the last thing on there is Booker T. Washington's autobiography. He was the founder of Tuskegee, one of the best educational institutions directly after slavery. Booker T. Washington was actually born as a slave, so he has a very interesting story. It's almost more of a up by the bootstraps story. This guy became an advisor to the president. This guy founded a school, and he did all of this after being born as a slave. So even in what would be a very racist time in society, you can still make something of yourself regardless. So even if you consider today to be a very racist time, you can still make something of yourself. But anyways, moving on. So basically here it says that teaching that World War II vets were given GI benefits without saying that black vets were deliberately excluded is a reason for critical race theory. So here's my thing. Teaching facts like that, they just shouldn't be seen as something that's a blemish on the history. I mean, it is a blemish on the history, but it's not something that should be so shameful that we shouldn't know about it. Okay, so I can see that side of the argument. Okay, the ugly, the slippery slope. So I want to go over to this Facebook or this Instagram post where this person basically just goes off on in a weird way that I just don't identify with. So this is from Juneteenth. Okay, so it says not black, have Juneteenth off, Venmo a black person now. Okay, so basically they're evoking some type of reparations or something like that, that because of slavery you should send money to black people, which kind of treats black people like children who need the money of non-black people, which I just don't identify with that type of thinking. So Then here it says gaslighting is making Juneteenth a federal holiday while banning critical race theory in schools, destabilizing COVID mutual aid efforts, refusing to defund and abolish the police, and blocking reparations legislation. Go play in someone else's face, America. So you see how these people are kind of like mashing together a bunch of things that don't necessarily have to do with race and law in the past in America. So this is kind of the slippery slope where it's like we kind of need a consistent definition of what we're trying to put into these schools. So America making Juneteenth a national holiday while banning people from teaching about it in schools is ironic. I don't think that they're actually banning people from teaching about it in schools. They're just not necessarily making it part of the curriculum. Black people are demanding reparations instead of white people getting the day off. So this one's just kind of weird. Like, not only white people got the day off, I'm pretty sure everybody who got the day off got the day off. Okay, so it's just this type of thinking. I can't identify with it. Juneteenth is a separate celebration of black joy through the pain caused exclusively by whiteness. White people don't have anything to celebrate on Juneteenth. Y'all still have work to do. Okay, so somebody posted this. It's just, anyways, it's just a line of thinking that I don't identify with. And that's why we need clear definitions. I think that's the next slide here. So yeah, going back, I always ask this: why are we worried about government crumbs? Because for one, that's not guaranteed. That's not lasting wealth. That's just putting you on the government's program, basically. They're putting you into welfare. If you ever read the autobiography of Malcolm X, he talks about how the welfare state is basically the worst place for black people, because then the government has you. They have you controlled, and it's going to be a whole lot worse than whatever you were in before. Okay, so, and then up above there, it said, the person who posted this was white, and they were a lot more broke than I am. So, like, you know, I just felt like they might need some money from me, if anything, not to Venmo me. Okay, so words and definitions are important. So this is not going to be controversial at all. So let's talk about the definitions of man versus male, woman versus female, and racist. So woman, an adult female human being. Okay, so we see today's society that is being denigrated, that is not being honored. It's being said that it's something else means woman, that it's a cultural thing. But if you look at the definition, the Oxford definition, it means an adult female human being. Okay, female, denoting the sex that can bear offspring or produce eggs, distinguished biologically by the production of gametes, ova, which can be fertilized by male gametes. Okay, that is a female. All right. Man, an adult male human being. A human being of either sex, a person. Okay, so number 2 is another thing that's under attack, that, you know, when you say man, you could just mean man as in humans. But these are definitions, and these are apparently sexist these days. Okay, male definition is a male person, a man or boy. The individual sex that is capable of producing small, usually motile gametes, such as sperm or spermatozoa, which fertilize eggs of a female, a plant having stamens but no pistils. Okay, that's male definition according to Merriam-Webster. Bigots over there. Okay, racist, prejudiced, or antagonistic towards a person or people based on the membership in a particular group, racial or ethnic group. A particular racial or ethnic group. Typically one that is a minority or marginalized. So typically, that means not always, right? So typically means in most cases, usually, but not always, all right? So you can be racist no matter what race you are by this definition, okay? So unless Oxford is just racist themselves, we're talking about something else. So the question is this racist? Is this prejudiced or antagonistic towards a person or group of people based on their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group? Okay, typically one that is minority or marginalized, which means not always, it means usually. Okay, so is this racist? Telling people that they should Venmo a black person because they're white? I would say so. All right, so institutionalized racism. So we already have words for what people want to turn racism into. Okay, and this is talking about laws. Okay, this is talking about racism that comes about through laws, but we'll go into that later. Okay, so consistent definitions are important. All right, I think that words have meaning, and we should use the proper words to mean the proper things, because once you start to get into this weird doublethink 1984 type of mindset, you start getting manipulated into thinking things that just aren't true, right? Just because you want to be a good person, you start doing strange things that aren't actually reality. Okay, so critical race theory. This first one basically says that it has to do with how law intersects with racism in the past. Okay, so this is according to Wikipedia. This is their definition. All right, this next one is according to Edweek. So basically it says that critical race theory is a concept that's more than 40 years old. The core of the idea is that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely a product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems. So basically they're going into, it has to do with the law as well. Okay, so this third one here is from Al. This one's from Purdue Al. Okay, so critical race theory is a theory, an interpretive mode that examines the appearance of race and racism across dominant cultural modes of expressions. In adopting this approach, critical race theory scholars attempt to understand how victims of systemic racism are affected by cultural perceptions of race and how they are able to represent themselves to counter prejudice. Okay, so basically it goes down here into history, sociology, law. Okay, traces racism throughout history and the legacy of slavery, civil rights, and recent events. So this one's basically talking about law. So that basically what they're talking about is law. So let's talk about law. So basically, these are some things that have happened throughout history that are very demonstrably things that affected black wealth. Okay, redlining, access to capital. We're talking about different types of predatory lending, differences in interest rates, slavery, obviously, Jim Crow, differences in schooling. I already talked about Booker T. Washington with Tuskegee, and Black Wall Street being burned to the ground. Okay, so these things are things that definitely did happen. They're things that we should talk about, and they should be in schools, in my opinion. But we'll get into some more later. What do the laws say today? So today we have the Fair Housing Act of 1986. And it basically says that you can't discriminate based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. Okay, so essentially discrimination is illegal as of then. Okay, 1968. What do the laws say today? Okay, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 says that employees and job applicants, they can't be discriminated against based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So basically the laws say that you cannot discriminate anymore. Okay, that's a good step forward. All right, on this next slide, we're going to talk about how the laws are basically affecting us today. So I've got a couple examples over here. One is the women in combat example. So women in combat example is, should women basically have to abide by the same physical fitness standards when they're in combat, so, or to be in combat jobs. So we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but the foot race example is basically, let's say that myself, a former track athlete, and just your average American got into a foot race. Okay, if we started the race at the same time, I would probably win. Okay, so is that a fair race or is that an unfair race? It really depends on what your definition of fairness is. And in the same thing with the women in combat example, if there's more women, or rather more men in combat jobs due to some type of physical fitness standard, is that a fair standard or is it an unfair standard? So we'll get into that as well. So some people define fairness as population representative, as in if there's 13% black people in the population, there should be 13% black people in your office or in your school or in whatever. We'll go through the Asians in college example, and I think I'm going to skip the racist bake sale because it's basically just where they went to a school, they sold cookies or something like that. I believe it was cakes, and they sold them for more if you were Asian, they sold them for less if you were black, and they sold them for $1 if you were white. So anyways, we're going to skip that. So let's go next slide here. Okay, so like we were just going over, what is opportunity? So some people say it's equal likelihood of an outcome. Other people will say that it's equal rules. So what you see is you really can't have both at the same time, right? You either have equal rules or you have equal likelihood of an outcome. So check this out. This is the overview of Harvard diversity statistics. So we see here that the population is 60% white, but at Harvard it's 37.1% white, okay? And we see that Hispanic is 18.5%. Over here, it is 10.9%. So black, underrepresented, 12.2, 8.9. Asian, overrepresented, 5.6 to 21.4. Okay. So then we've got people that are multiracial over here, 2.8%. and 7.8% over here. So this is an example of unequal rules. So Asian students at Harvard. So we see down here that Asian students over the years have the highest SAT scores. Okay, they're still overrepresented over here, but it's hard to determine by my definitions, is this fair or is this unfair? White students, you see that they have the next best SAT scores. Black students down here near the bottom. Okay, Native American students down here near the bottom, and Hispanic students down here near the bottom. Okay, it kind of trades off, goes back and forth. But the question is this fair that the Asian students have to get the highest grades? Or is it fair? Would it be fair if everybody just got in based on their grades and we weren't worried about, this population standard? So a lot of people will give you the argument that your campus is better when it's more diverse, but I don't see the statistics to really back that up. Better in what way? Better because that's what you want to see, or better because people achieve higher grades, or better because people go on to do better things after the school, or in what ways is it better? We're just kind of told to swallow that without actually asking any questions. But okay, let's move on to this next one. So this one is the equity thing that you see this cartoon often. Okay, and basically I have a couple problems with this. One, we assume that these people can't grow. Okay, we assume that this person will be this short for all of time. We assume that these people are adults. Okay, instead of assuming something else like this person is a kid. Okay, so the majority of millionaires are 40 years old plus. I believe the average millionaire is 45 years old. So this is kind of just an inaccurate as far as like when it comes to wealth in the United States. This is inaccurate because most people, this should actually be a child, basically is what I'm saying. And there's other questions like, what does the baseball game represent? So what does this person actually not have access to? Does this person not have access to literally a baseball game? Or does this person not have access to food? Okay, so that's the questions that you have to ask yourself. And what does the fence represent? Is the fence just the price of admission? What do the fence represent? Because if you get rid of prices, we get something that's a lot worse than somebody not being able to go to a baseball game. So then this one goes a little bit further. So this one says that the reality of capitalism is that these people are in a hole, these people have much, these people have a little bit, and they want liberation, which basically means that you take away the fence, which I would assume represents prices. But think about this. What would happen if you actually just took away the fence from like a World Series game? You think there would only be 3 people trying to watch the game? Or do you think there would be utter chaos outside of this game? All right. Or do you think there would be basically no way to actually see the game, and it would look like that I Have a Dream speech that Martin Luther King gave as far as, how many people would show up to this game? You wouldn't be able to get the game, right? This is kind of like, this is what people want you to think, but really you end up with bread lines. All right. And this is the reality, okay? And I've seen this, especially out here being in the country that I'm out here in, is that capitalism, for one, if this is literally a baseball game, most people have a TV. And if you don't have a TV, please comment down below how you're watching this without a TV or a phone or a laptop or anything. But anyways, I think we're getting about to the end here. We got 2 more slides here. So legacy of slavery. The legacy of slavery argument to me is kind of weak when you actually look at the statistics of wealthy people and how wealth is actually built. So I've got some statistics over here. 80% of millionaires are self-made and did not inherit their wealth. So the whole legacy of slavery argument is kind of weak there. 90% of families who are wealthy are no longer wealthy after 3 generations. 70% no longer wealthy after 2 generations. And a generation is defined as 30 years. So Jim Crow was 56 years ago. That's nearly 2 generations ago. So 70% of people who were wealthy from Jim Crow are no longer wealthy. Okay. Slavery was 156 years ago. That's 5.2 generations. If you take that 90% and the 70%, that's 0.1 times 0.3. So 3% of families that were rich from slavery are still wealthy. So what do? Do we target those 3% of families and make them pay reparations? How much money is that actually? And how do we actually go about finding out who those people are? So anyways, it just doesn't really make sense when you actually look at the statistics of how wealth is built. So anyways, let's move on to this last slide, and we're looking at things that aren't equal and how would you actually control for these things, right? These are things that predict your wealth, but how would you actually control for these things? All right, so your upbringing. You can't control how you were brought up. how your parents treated you, what they told you, your environment. Should we make every environment the same? Should we make every neighborhood the same? Is that the solution? Your culture, your influences. Should we control people's culture? Should we control what they tell you that you can do, that what you ought to do, what you are capable of doing? Your schooling. Should we abolish private schools? Should we make all schooling standard? Should we not let people have accelerated learning programs? Whether your parents were both around, how do you control for that? Do you make sure that everybody has parents that are the same exact parents that give you the standardized upbringing? How do you control for that? Whether your parents save for college, do we abolish the 529 plan? Do we make sure that people can't save for college? Do we make college free? How do we solve for that? Your spending habits. Should we control what people spend their money on? I mean, you see how we start to get into this ridiculous rabbit hole when we actually try to make things equal. And your career choices. Should we make sure that everybody, their career pays the same? Should we tell employers how much they should pay? Should everybody work for the government? Should everybody have their career choices made for them based on their race? You just get into this weird rabbit hole that you don't want to go down. And last slide here, just expanding upon the last one. We all get a different start socioeconomically. So how do we control for that? Do we basically control people's choices? Do we do a wealth tax, even though that 90% of people will lose it within 3 generations anyways? You have to ask yourself these questions about critical race theory and whether or not we should do something, So anyways, hopefully you guys liked the video. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you want to support the channel, as always, you got some links down below in the description that you can get some free money from. And I'll see you guys in the next video.